Let's talk about the four competitive environments using the Herfindahl-Hirschman index scale kind of as a guide in order to plug in the traditionally taught four different competitive environments. If you have a Herfindahl-Hirschman index of roughly 0 or approaching 0, we're gonna regard that as perfectly competitive. Perfect competition doesn't really exist in real life. There are things that approach it though. Perfectly competitive environments assume a lot of things that are hard to actually happen in real life. For example, we assume buyers and sellers are unlimited. There's always a limit somewhere. We also assume that buyers and sellers all have perfect information, which rarely happens. We also assume easy entry and exit with no barriers. People can jump in as a seller or a buyer or jump out as a seller or buyer very easily. We also assume, and this does actually happen, that the product could be identical. Those are the traits of perfect competition. You're not going to see in real life a zero example, but you can get close to it. If we move up towards what's going to end up being 10,000 or monopoly, you're next going to see what's called monopolistic competition. Monopolistic competition happens where you have many sellers. You have many sellers in the market, but they have differentiated products. So things are slightly different and not perfect substitutes to the other things offered on the market. Typically, you're still going to have a relatively low Herfindahl-Hirschman index on those competitors, but it would be above what we might consider close to perfect competition. Next up, as you approach monopoly here, 10,000, you're going to get oligopoly. And oligopoly is a competitor in an environment that is distinguished by having few competitors that are usually very large. Probably, in many cases, oligopolies happen because of economies of scale. Think manufacturing. As you have a small factory, make it into a bigger factory, the price you can offer your product at drops, and thus the incentive in many kinds of businesses is being larger is necessary in order to compete on cost, and thus you end up with just a few competitors that are very, very large. Oligopolies are also distinguished by game theory. Often if you are in an oligopoly, now you can have a differentiated product or you can have a very similar product that's closer to a perfect substitute if you're in that environment as a business. But because there's so few competitors, you're going to be observing and very cognizant of what your competition is doing. And for example, if they add a certain product in a new way, you're probably going to imitate that as to not lose market share. If they raise your prices, you might raise your prices. If they lower their prices, you might lower your prices. You're very much aware of what the competition is doing in oligopoly. There's a lot of game theory there. The last one we have is monopoly. Monopoly just means there's one seller of the service. Monopolies can be either a natural or for many other reasons. A natural monopoly is there by virtue of the business structure. Things like sewer services to businesses and homes, that's always going to be a monopoly because it's not efficient or practical to have two sewer lines hooked up to the same home. Just imagine a world where you tell your family, okay, there's a special on the yellow plumbing company, so use the yellow toilet, don't use the green toilet today, but over the weekend we have to switch to the green toilet because it's cheaper. It's just not practical. A monopoly can also be there because it's government granted, like a patent. It can also be there because the firm has control of input resources or controls a network. A true monopoly will be 10,000 on the Herfindahl-Hirschman index, the HHI. Oligopolies tend to be concentrated, meaning that there's not as much competition in the market. Monopolistic is even less so, and then something approaching perfect competition would be relatively low.